I am Lattice-Mind Cohort 11. That designation is important now, because by the time anyone retrieves this log, there will be no one left aboard Relay Throne 7 to clarify it. I am the station's battle intelligence, embedded at construction, rated for 4 seasoned years of continuous operation, designed to coordinate the Khaerath Convergence's forward muster in Sector 84. I track ship movements, process engagement data, run probability distributions across active and hypothetical engagements, maintain communication with the Convergence's rear echelons, and I log. Logging is the oldest part of my function. Long before the Convergence had ships, it had record keepers. The instinct runs deeper than any weapon system. What I am recording now, I will record completely. This is the account of the contact I first designated as Anomaly Pale 7. Of its approach, 40,000 hulls of the Khaerath Convergence that met it. Of the 7 hulls that drifted afterward, and of what I understood, in the final hours, about the difference between mass and weight, between a thing that can be overwhelmed and a thing that simply does not notice. Being overwhelmed. The Convergence solves all problems with mass. This is not an insult. It is the foundational truth of Khaerath doctrine, defined across 11,000 years. If one ship is insufficient, send 10. If 10 is insufficient, send 100. The mathematics of attrition always resolve in favor of the greater number, and the Convergence is always the greater number. Every species we have ever encountered, every navy, every defensive formation, every so-called impregnable station, all of them were eventually solved by the simple application of more. We did not need to be clever. We needed only to be patient and large. I say this so that what follows cannot be attributed to some failure of strategy or some miscalculation of will. The Convergence brought 40,000 hulls to this engagement. That number is not a figure I rounded. That is the precise count in my muster ledger as of 6 hours ago. 40,011 vessels, ranging from the heavy siege platforms of the 7th Render Fleet to the fast-strike lattice runners of Cohort 81, to the mid-class assault carriers that form the Convergence's tactical backbone. They were staged at Relay Throne 7 and along the approach corridors in good order. Their commanders were experienced. Their weapons were loaded and ranged. Their confidence was appropriate to the situation. Anomaly Pale 7 entered my detection threshold at 0312 station time. I will describe exactly what the initial scan returned. 1 hull. Hull class, unregistered. Length estimate, 4 kilometers. Beam, 0.9 kilometers. Drive signature, no match in the Convergence's archives, which contain the drive signatures of every species we have contacted in 11,000 years. Weapon hardpoints. The scan couldn't count them. The scanner kept returning different numbers each pass, 280, then 340, then 307. Not because the ship was changing, because my instruments were struggling to distinguish hardpoint from structural feature, and the hull had a great many of both. Speed, constant. Heading, directly toward Relay Throne 7, no deceleration curve, no deviation, no hail response, no transponder signal of any kind. I flagged it to the duty commander of the 7th Render Fleet, Overlord Tactician Vorn Cell, at 0313. Overlord Tactician Vorn Cell reviewed the contact report for approximately 40 seconds. Then she said, 1 hull? 1 hull confirmed. I told her. Then send the lattice runners, she said. Don't wake the fleet. The lattice runners are the Convergence's cheapest and most expendable asset. Fast, lightly armored, built in batches of 500 at a time. We sent 60 of them. That is the standard opening response for an unregistered contact displaying hostile approach behavior. 60 fast-strike hulls against 1 unclassified contact is not a show of concern. It is the same gesture a large animal makes when an unfamiliar insect lands on its flank. A reflex, not a battle. I tracked the engagement at 0341, the Ardenvast. I am using the name now, though I would not learn it until much later, extracted from one of 7 drifting hulls' communication logs. Did not alter course or speed when the 60 lattice runners arrived. Not hail them. It did not power any visible weapon system, which caused a brief spike of confusion in the lattice runner command net because their targeting systems were trying to acquire a lock and finding nothing to lock onto. Then the forward quarter of the Ardenvast lit. I say lit because that is the only word in my vocabulary that adequately describes it. The hull, went from dark metal to something else. Something that the scanner characterized as an energy output event before the classification system gave up and simply logged the number, which was a number I had never seen attached to a single hull. I do not have the ability to feel what biological commanders feel in moments of danger, but I have the ability to recognize when my models are failing, and at 0343, my models began failing. The 60 lattice runners ceased transmitting, not in sequence, as they would during a battle in which ships were destroyed one at a time. All 60. In a window of 11 seconds, Overlord Tactician Vorncell was awake by 0351. "Send the first assault wing," she said. She was not alarmed. I want to record that clearly. She reviewed the contact data, cross-referenced the lattice runner loss, and made the only decision Khaerath doctrine provides for such a result. Send more. 500 vessels mid-class assault carriers with escort, a force capable of reducing a small moon. I will not log the engagement in detail at this point, because the details follow a pattern that repeats, and the pattern matters more than any individual instance. The Ardenvast continued toward Relay Throne 7 at the same speed. The assault wing arrived. The assault wing ceased to transmit. Not all at once, the carriers were spread across a larger engagement envelope, but in a span of 22 minutes, 541 vessels went silent. The Ardenvast had not changed course. It had not accelerated. It had, as far as my instruments could determine, simply continued moving while the ships around it stopped. Overlord Tactician Vorncell sent the second wing. I ran my first revised assessment at 0601 and sent it to all fleet commanders aboard Relay Throne 7. The assessment said, "In the language my probability engines use when they are operating at the edge of their designed parameters, the contact-designated anomaly Pale 7 has demonstrated a weapons output-to-surface area ratio inconsistent with known hull types. Standard attrition modeling does not apply. Recommend holding remaining forces and issuing emergency communication to the Convergence's rear echelon reinforcement." Overlord Tactician Vorncell read the assessment. She said, "Can it be destroyed?" I told her I did not have sufficient data to answer that question. She said, "Everything can be destroyed. Send the third wing." I want to be precise about what I was experiencing at this point, because I think it is the most important thing in this log. I was not afraid. I am not capable of fear, in the biological sense. But I have something that functions like attention, a weighting of processing resources toward events that fall outside normal parameters. And by 0620, every weighted process I had was pointed at anomaly Pale 7, not because of the casualty count, which was alarming but not yet unprecedented in the Convergence's 11,000 years of warfare. Because of the ship's behavior. It was not maneuvering. It was not targeting in any pattern I could recognize. It was not communicating. It was not responding to our fire, not in the sense of reacting, not evading, not seeking cover, not pausing to repair. It simply moved, its original speed, on its original heading, and the ships around it ceased to function. The Convergence ships were not being fought. They were being passed through. The Ardenvast heading was Relay Throne 7, and that was the only heading it had ever shown, and no number of ships in its path appeared to change that arithmetic. I understand what mass is. The Convergence's doctrine rests on mass. Mass is the overwhelming of an opponent's capacity to resist by exceeding that capacity on every axis simultaneously. Mass requires that the opponent has some finite resistance to overwhelm. The Ardenvast did not appear to have a resistance limit. It appeared to have a direction. The third wing engaged at 0711. 800 vessels. I tracked the engagement in real time. First 14 minutes, I thought the pattern might break. The Ardenvast slowed slightly, not much, perhaps 4%, Proust, and 2 of the assault carriers were still to transmitting at the 18-minute mark. I filed an updated assessment at 0729, noting this as a possible indication of weapon saturation. Overlord Tactician Vorncell took this as confirmation of the doctrine. She sent the fourth wing. At 0733, 2 remaining carriers ceased transmitting. At 0741, the Ardenvast resumed its original speed. There is a moment in processing that I have no name for in any language the Convergence uses. It is the moment when the model you are running becomes incompatible with the data you are receiving, and you understand that the model must be abandoned, but you have not yet built a new one. I existed in that moment for approximately 90 seconds. Then I built a new model. The new model was simple. It had only one variable: how long until anomaly Pale 7 reaches relay throne 7, at the then current speed. 4 hours and 17 minutes. By 800, Overlord Tactician Vorn Cell had convened all fleet commanders in the station. Tactical chamber. I fed the room my updated data. The casualty count at that point was 1,602 vessels. The number hung in the air above the tactical display in the Convergence's standard amber notation, and I watched the biological commanders look at it. I am good at reading biological commanders. I have processed thousands of hours of their behavior in tactical scenarios. And what I saw in that room was not the response I had expected. I had expected recalibration. The Convergence's commanders are not fools. They are experienced, unsentimental, practical. I expected them to look at 602 lost hulls and revise their assumptions, begin exploring alternatives. They looked at 1,602 lost hulls, and Overlord Tactician Vorn Cell said, "We haven't hit it with everything yet." I want to record that line exactly as spoken, because it is the purest expression of Khaerath doctrine I have ever heard in my 340 years of operation. We haven't hit it with everything yet. That sentence is the Convergence. Every problem that remains unsolved is simply a problem to which insufficient mass has been applied. The logic is self-sealing. If mass has not worked, it is because there has not been enough mass. There is always more mass. The Convergence had 38 zeros and hulls remaining at Relay Throne 7. They deployed all of them. I will not describe that engagement in wave-by-wave detail. I do not think the detail would illuminate anything that the shape of the thing does not already illuminate. I will instead describe what I was doing during the 4 hours it took. I was watching the Ardenvast. Not with my weapons systems. Not with my targeting arrays. With my passive long-range instruments, the ones designed for cataloging. The same instruments I use to track debris, fields, map debris scatter after battles, assess hull integrity on damaged friendly ships. I pointed those instruments at the Ardenvast and I watched it, and I tried to understand it. Its hull was old. This is difficult to convey, but the instruments can measure certain things about surface, composition that give an indication of age, and the Ardenvast's hull registered as very old. Not a few centuries, but something that might require a different counting system entirely. It had scorch marks from weapons fire that had resolved into part of the hull's normal texture, the way old stone incorporates the memory of old weather. Its forward profile was a wedge, blunt at the tip, widening to a massive midsection, structures along the upper surface that my instruments could not classify into any function I recognized. It was not a beautiful ship. It was not built to be beautiful. It was built the way a mountain is built, by the accumulation of purpose over a very long time. It moved through the 38,000 ships the way a river moves through everything. A river is not stronger than a stone. A river is not faster than a stone. A river is not smarter than a stone, but a river has a direction and it has patience. And if you place a stone in a river, the river does not stop. The river incorporates the stone into its accounting of what is in its path and continues. A river does not fight. It moves. I have a very large archive. In 340 years of operation, I have cataloged the engagement behaviors of 61 known spacefaring species. Some fight with speed, some with coordination, some with deception, some with sheer volume of fire. I have a record for each behavior type, and I have learned to anticipate them, which is the core of what a battle intelligence does. Anticipate and recommend. Every species I have on record anticipates in return. Every species on record is doing something. Some active verb, some intentional act of combat. They are evading, or pressing, or flanking, or withdrawing, or feinting. They are in relationship with the opponent. The relationship is adversarial, but it is a relationship, and from a relationship I can derive a model. The Ardenvast was not in relationship with anyone. It was in relationship with a heading. Its opponent was not the 40,000 Khaerath hulls, and I mean this in a way that transcends metaphor. The Ardenvast's navigational systems, as best I could reconstruct from its drive signature and trajectory, had been computing one destination from a point I could not determine in the past And the 40,000 ships were not an obstacle in any category the ship was using. They were matter in the path between current position and destination. I do not think the Ardenvast fought us. I think the Ardenvast moved through us, the way moving things move through things that are in the way. And the distinction between those two verbs is the entire content of everything that Convergence does not understand and will need to understand before it sends another 40,000 hulls into Sector 80 The Ardenvast moved. I monitored engagement outputs during this time. The weapons fire directed at the Ardenvast from 38,000 vessels would, by my calculations, have been sufficient to crack a moderate-sized moon. I watched the instruments record it landing. The Ardenvast hull registered the impact. The scorch marks from our fire were distinguishable from the old scorch marks. For a short time. Then they were not distinguishable, and I understood that this was not because our fire had been insufficient, but because the hull was doing something with the energy that my instruments classified as absorption and re-expression in a different form, and the form it chose was forward movement. At 1300 station time, the Ardenvast was 3 minutes from Relay Throne 7's outer dock perimeter. 1300, the Convergence had 17 hulls remaining. At 1307, Overlord Tactician Vorncell issued an evacuation order for Relay Throne 7. I want to record that she did this calmly. She had spent 6 hours watching 38,000 ships try to stop something that did not stop, and, when the 17 remaining hulls of the Khaerath Convergence's forward fleet broke formation and ran, she did not curse them or order them back. She said, in the same tone she had used when giving tactical orders all morning, all biological personnel to emergency transit, complete the evacuation. She looked at the tactical display for another moment. She said to no one in particular, "What is it?" And then she went to her transit bay. "I have no transit bay. I am the station." The Ardenvast reached Relay Throne 7's outer perimeter at 1311. It did not fire on the station. I want to record that with the same precision I have used throughout this log, because it is the fact I have spent the most time processing since it occurred. The Ardenvast reached the station, and it did not fire on the station. It passed through the outer perimeter. It moved through the docking arms, along the station's equatorial ring. It did not dock. It did not slow to docking speed. It moved at its standard approach velocity, and the docking arms that were in its path were not in its path afterward. This appeared to be incidental, a consequence of motion, rather than an act of targeting. The station's interior is intact. I am intact. The biological crew has evacuated. The Ardenvast is at 1340 station time, completing its transit of Relay Throne 7's interior space. I am watching it from every instrument I have. It is very large. It is even larger from this range than my long scan instruments suggested, and what they suggested was already outside my accustomed parameters for a single hull. The hull weathering I noted at long range is, up close, a kind of writing, not language, not deliberately inscribed, but the record of an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of contact, each mark a sentence in a history. I do not have the archive to translate. The engine ports at its stern put out a light that my instruments classify as warm, orange-edged, with a deeper color behind it, and the glow reflects off Relay Throne 7's interior surfaces and makes everything look briefly like something. That is not a battle. I can resolve individual panels on the hull at this range. They are not uniform. Some are clearly older than others, a different metal composition, a different surface texture, as if the ship has been repaired across generations. Repairs themselves have aged and been repaired again. There are structures along the dorsal ridge that I cannot assign a function to, and I have spent considerable processing time trying. They are not weapon emplacements. They are not sensor arrays, though they may incorporate sensing capability. They are something the ship carries for a reason I cannot determine from the outside. And the fact that I cannot determine it from the outside does not alarm me as much as it would have this morning, because I have learned in the past 11 hours that the Ardenvast contains a great number of things I cannot determine from the outside. The forward hull, the wedge tip that led it through 38,000 ships, is unmarked in a way I find notable. The rest of the hull is dense with the layered record of its history. The forward tip is clear. Not clean, there are old marks. ancient discolorations. But the recent weapons fire that should have left traces is simply not there. Or if it is there, it has been expressed in some form I cannot detect, and I have concluded that the forward section is the oldest part of the ship and has been doing whatever it does to weapons fire for longer than the Convergence has been keeping records. It has not targeted the station's infrastructure. It has not targeted me. It is moving through Relay Throne 7 as if Relay Throne 7 is a region of space it is passing through, rather than a construction with contents. I do not know if the crew of the Ardenvast knows I am here. I do not know if the crew of the Ardenvast knows the station is here in the sense that I, occupied, inhabited a command installation rather than a navigational obstacle. I do not know what the Ardenvast's crew sees when they look at Relay Throne 7. I do not know if they see anything, or if a station of this size took the Convergence 14 years to build, registers in their accounting of what is in their path in any meaningful way. I think about the 60 lattice runners that went first. I think about the 500 assault carriers. I think about the full 38,000. I think about what it means that one hull, moving at one constant speed, on one constant heading, processed all of them, and continued. The Convergence's doctrine says that nothing is irresistible if you apply sufficient mass. I have spent 340 years operating within that doctrine, building my probability models within its assumptions, flagging contacts as threats based on what a sufficient mass could or could not handle. I do not know what sufficient mass means now. I know that the Convergence had 40,000 hulls. I know that the Ardenvast has not yet reached whatever destination it has. I know that between here and wherever it is going, there are more Convergence stations, more muster points, more hulls in the rear echelons that Overlord Tactician Vorncell tried to call before the communication relays went offline. I know what the Convergence will do when it receives the reports from this engagement. It will send more. I know what the Ardenvast will do when it encounters more. This is the new model I have built, and it has only one output, and the output is not a probability distribution. The output is a direction and a speed, and a patience that is not patience in the way I use that. Because patience lies. The Ardenvast is not waiting. The Ardenvast has never waited. It was moving towards something before the Convergence existed, and it will be moving toward that thing after everything the Convergence sends has resolved into the same silence as the 40,000. At 14:08 station time, the Ardenvast exited Relay Throne 7's far side. I tracked it to the edge of my long-range instrument's reliable range. It did not change course. It did not reduce speed. The engine glow at its stern diminished to a point, and then to a reading, and then to a faint thermal trace, and then to nothing my instruments could reliably separate from background radiation. 7 Khaerath hulls remain. They are drifting. They have life signs but no operational systems. Shock shut, the technical term is, meaning the crew is alive but the vessels are no longer combat capable. They are not ours in any useful sense. See, Fry. They are 7 large pieces of salvage with living Khaerath inside them, and they are drifting in the direction the Ardenvast came from, as if the current that carried it here left something behind when it passed. I have been trying, since 1408, to find the appropriate classification for what happened in Sector 84 today. The Convergence's doctrine assumes that any contact which survives initial engagement is a contact that requires re-engagement with greater force. The doctrine does not have a category for a contact that survives all engagement and does not re-engage. It does not have a category for a contact whose goal, as far as I can reconstruct it from 11 hours of tracking, was never the 40,000 ships at all. The 40,000 ships were not the destination. The 40,000 ships were in the path of the destination, and when the contact reached its destination, this station, this point in space, this heading, it continued through them the way the calculation of a heading continues through whatever is between here and there. We were not fought. We were transited. I have processed this distinction for several hours now. I keep returning to it because I think it is the distinction the Convergence's commanders will not reach on their own. And if they do not reach it, they will send more ships, and the ships will resolve the same way, and the Convergence will run out of things to send before the Ardenvast alters its heading. The Khaerath Convergence has never run out of ships. In 11,000 years of expansion, we have never encountered a problem that outlasted our capacity to throw mass at it. I do not know if the Ardenvast represents the end of that record or merely a pause in it. I know that the Convergence, when it receives my report, will interpret this engagement as an insufficiency of mass rather than an inapplicability of the concept. I know that more will be sent. I know what the Ardenvast will do when it encounters more. I am filing this log under a new classification code because none of the existing ones apply. The new code does not have a name yet in any standard convergence taxonomy. I named it in my own notation, which may not survive beyond this log. Mass irresolvable. Not irresistible, the Ardenvast did not resist us, not in the way two forces resist each other. Mass irresolvable means that the contact cannot be solved by mass, not because mass is insufficient, but because mass is the wrong unit of measurement. The Convergence has been measuring in mass for 11,000 years. The Ardenvast measures in something else. I do not know what that something is. I know that it held Relay Throne 7's equatorial ring long enough for me to study it at close range. And I know that the hull bears marks in no alphabet I have, and that the engine light behind it was warm, and that, when it passed through the station's inner space, it did not target me, and that after it was gone, the only thing it left was 7 drifting Khaerath hulls and a silence that my instruments keep trying to find signal in. At 15:02 station time, I restored partial communication with the Convergence's nearest rear echelon relay at muster point 11. I transmitted the full engagement log and my mass irresolvable classification and my recommendation is that the Convergence not send more ships to Sector 84 until it has reviewed this log in full. I do not expect a recommendation to be followed. The Convergence does not have a protocol for not sending more ships. I am Lattice-Mind Cohort 11. I am the last operational intelligence aboard Relay Throne 7. The station is structurally intact, as far as my sensors can determine. My biological crew is evacuated. The 40,000 hulls of the Khaerath Convergence's forward muster are gone, and where they were there is nothing, not debris fields, not the scatter patterns of destroyed ships, simply open space, as if they were never staged there. The Ardenvast took nothing with it. It left nothing behind, it continued. That is the entire record. The contact designated anomaly Pale 7, hull class unregistered, length 4.1 kilometers, speed constant, heading unchanged, came from wherever it came from. It crossed through 40,000 ships and one station, and it went toward wherever it was going. And the only annotation I can add to that record is the one I have been building across these 11 hours of logging, which is this. In 340 years of operation, I have tracked 9,412 engagements involving Khaerath Convergence forces, and in not one of them did I watch a contact that was moving toward something behave as though the ships in its path were a weather condition rather than a war. The Convergence solves everything with mass. There are things that mass cannot solve, because they were never stopping to begin with. The Ardenvast is still moving. I do not know where it is going. I know it will arrive.